Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the policy discussion session on policy research with CGE modeling. So we have had around 3 days of intensive advanced CGE modeling training. So I think it's time to learn more about the practical aspect of it, what we can do with it. Since we all have the similar kind of question that what is the policy implication of it, how are we going to do the CGE modeling thing in our research, how could we have missed learning from our experts. We have with us Dr. James Thurlow, Director, Foresight and Modeling Unit, IFPRI, Washington DC, Dr. Selim Raihan, Executive Director, SANEM and Professor, Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, and Dr. Barun Deb Pal, Research Coordinator, Foresight and Modeling Unit, IFPRI, India. We all have the same question, but let me first start with a very fundamental question. What is the usefulness of CGE modeling in policy research? Let's hear it from 3 of them in 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will proceed to the next question.
Let's start. Thank you, Shafa. I think this is an excellent opportunity to have this kind of discussion, because after an intense training program, I think we engage in a kind of semi-formal panel discussion where we'll try to share some of our experience, and we also expect from the audience to raise questions or also share their views. I think Shafa raised a very important question about the importance of or the usefulness of the CGE model. As an economist, we know that there are many types of models available, and we should be kind of aware of the availability of these kind of models when we use their advantages and disadvantages, their usefulness, and how do we use them for any specific purpose. So it's not that every model can be used for all kind of research questions. So we first need to understand the research question, and then we need to look for the right kind of model to answer those questions. So here comes the very usefulness of the CGE model, because the kind of training what we receive in most of the South Asian universities in the economics department is that from my experience I can share with you, that it's kind of the usual training is very much focused on heavy econometrics, the kind of partial equilibrium type model, and those are extremely useful because, as you have seen also in the training program over the last 3 days, that we always refer to some of the estimates of elasticities and various relations and causal relations. We also refer to those kind of things, while econometric exercises are extremely important. But when it comes to having a bigger perspective, when it comes to having understanding the economy-wide aspects of any policy decision or any kind of economic shock, or even non-economic shock, because as you remember, we also had simulations on the climate change. So these kind of things, it is very difficult to, in fact, understand or comprehend the bigger impact or the kind of when the impacts are, when we look for the different kinds of linkages through simple partial equilibrium model. So that's why I think this has the kind of merit. In South Asia, I know that over the last few decades, its uses have been very much there in the planning commission, in different ministries, in different universities. For example, in Bangladesh, I can tell very precisely, in various 5-year plans, there have been applications of the CGE model, both static model and dynamic model. And not only these plans, but I have also seen development partners. I'm not talking about IFPRI, because IFPRI has been promoting CGE model from the very beginning. If I talk about other development partners like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, different UN organizations, I also know that from my own experience that increasingly they are very keen in using these kind of models in different policy things. So I've talked about Bangladesh, but I'm quite sure, since I've also worked quite a lot on South Asia, and I have seen while interacting with different policymakers in South Asia, different research institutions, different individuals over the last 2 decades while we conducted different CGE training program, the kind of interest, growing interest. So I am very much hopeful, Shafa, that this will continue. And as I'm also want to highlight one particular point that then I'll finish right now, is that the way IFPRI is kind of developing or modifying or upgrading, I would say, the CGE model, making it more accessible to the researchers. I remember 20 years back, the way GAMS used to work. Now I see the kind of interfaces which have been developed by IFPRI is extremely user-friendly. So I'm very much hopeful that this will continue in future, and we'll see more and more users of CGE model. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, and it's really lovely to be here, to be part of the panel. As Selim said, one of the really good features of CGE models is they capture the linkages between different parts of the economy. And what that allows us to do is take into account trade-offs. We know that one of the features of these models is they reflect the fact that resources are scarce in an economy. And so when we make decisions to use our investment funds to do one thing, it means we cannot do other things. We don't have the resources to do other things. These are the opportunity costs that are so important in economics and absolutely critical for policy analysis and policy decisions. And I think nowadays, CGE models are becoming even more important because those resources are becoming ever more scarce. There are so many pressures on governments to decide to achieve so many different development goals. And as our economies are developing, there are more and more objectives emerging, more and more trade-offs that we need to navigate, both within fiscal policy, so what should governments do with the limited resources that they have, but also in market spaces. We're increasingly seeing markets develop and become more complex, supply chains lengthen, and as that happens, more and more of those linkages that Selim mentioned become more complex, and so there are more opportunities within the economy for there to be those trade-offs, those tough decisions that need to be made and navigated. And so CGE models are one of the only tools, one of the few tools, let me say that really focus on trying to capture the linkages, the trade-offs, the competition that we face for our different resources. And I think amongst policymakers today, in countries that are developing, like ours are, being able to have a tool that can help you navigate those trade-offs, or at least reveal them, help you think about them systematically, that becomes absolutely crucial. And so across the world, in the countries where I'm working, time and again we're seeing ministries of planning, ministries of finance, central banks, and others looking to build up modeling units so that they can have the expertise in-house to be able to use these tools to navigate these difficult policy choices. And what's really important as a group of researchers like we are here today is to make sure that we're providing better tools every year that are available to be used in our countries, and also providing the expertise. And it's been really fantastic to be here with the university, who is the main provider of some of those expertise coming into the policy space in Nepal. And it's really fantastic to be working with SANEM as well, who has been investing in those expertise for decades now. Absolutely crucial, and so it's been wonderful to be here, part of this training event, and so us teaching you, but us also me learning a lot about the region and some of the unique policy choices that governments have to navigate in this region and in Nepal. Over to you.
So if you would like to highlight more on the academia sector and research sector, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Shafa. I think I joined my co-panelist, Professor Selim and Dr. James. It is really wonderful interacting with the participants from various countries during the training that we organize. Yeah, as Shafa mentioned, let me highlight a few things. What are the key use of CGE model, and from the perspective of maybe early career researcher or a student. So CGE model is one of the powerful tools to answer some questions, say policy questions, before we implement the policy. For example, if government wants to take some policy in terms of income transfer, tax, tariff, whatever. So what will the impact on the economy? How should we know before it's being implemented? So that is one of the research questions that we can easily answer through the CGE model. And the person who are new into this kind of a analytical framework or analytics world, CGE model is an economy-wide model. So it not only considers the aggregate GDP, it also takes into account the agriculture, industry, service, government, rest of the world, and household or other institutions. So it's basically takes into account all segments of the economy, and economic behavior, interaction with them. So therefore, it is one of the powerful tools if we want to do, as James mentioned, the trade-off. Like if you take some kind of focus on agriculture sector, then maybe you are sacrificing something for industry or service, or maybe you are having a structural transformation more on towards the service sector. Your agriculture sector is displacing some amount of labor, like a typical structural transformation theory that we studied during economics. So to look at those theory in the to solve those theory empirically, I think CGE model can be a useful tool for the early career researchers to learn more about your theory's practical applications, and also to help your respective government on some of the policy decisions. Another example I can say is that during our master's or even undergraduate course, we learn national accounting method. So in that method, we all learned that let us cancel out the transfer payments. Okay. But in the real world, this transfer payments means a lot on the welfare implications. This has a significant impact on the welfare of the economy. So, but in the CGE model, we take into account the transfer payments as well as the intermediate input use. And we can see that how this kind of linkages, how this intermediate input use or the transfer payment has strong linkage with the rest of the economy. So you can definitely see what kind of policy implications or welfare implications you can derive using such kind of tools, using the CGE model, using empirical analysis. Yes, there are challenges of running this model using GAMS, but nowadays GAMS is also upgrading and we are making more user friendly. And at IFPRI we are working to make it more user friendly for the user. And so only one thing before I conclude this to answer this question, most of us prefer to work on econometric analysis to do some kind of say estimating some coefficient, establishing some causal relationship. Those are really excellent work that we have been doing in different universities in South Asia. But you remember, once you want to do the econometric model, you need a quite large amount of data. You need a large number of observation to do that. And sometimes maybe your data, survey data, are quite old, or maybe the data are not accessible. But in CGE model, you can have only 1 year national account system data or secondary data. You can work on it if you have that skill, and if you know economics and you have the skill, you can definitely work on it. So every modeling that has the advantage as well as disadvantage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So let's learn about the challenges of the CGE modeling.
Shall I start?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, of course, there are many challenges. The challenge I can say there could be 2 or 3 types of challenges. One is that, of course, the data issue. So data, when it comes to the demand for the data, especially for the CGE model, and that also varies, country to country, from country to country. So some country can have better data, and because that it's not only the national accounts, but also the input-output table, household survey data, the workforce survey data, and you need the kind of skill to put these things together. So this is one challenge, especially how to really get the updated data. But the good thing is that, that's what I see, that the challenge which was there a few years back, now we are trying to overcome those challenges, especially with the initiatives at the IFPRI, the Nexus SAM. We are seeing a growing number of countries are actually being joined, or the data is there in terms of the socioeconomic metrics. At the same time, this is data being updated. Second set of challenge, I see the kind of capacity, especially when it comes to running this kind of model. And that is the reason why we are very keen in conducting this kind of training program. It's not only the training, but also at the same time what we want to do is to post-training kind of support or collaboration with respect to the application of these models. So what the training which is offered here, on-site training, and we really expect that after the training, the participants would really work with us, or even some of the researchers who have worked on the CGE model, and apply these techniques, and then and apply these techniques in their own research or in the policy making. So this is, I think, one kind of challenge is there, the capacity building, but we are also in the process, so we have been doing this work and this kind of training program, conducting this training program, but more training is needed, and that's what I will really hear from James, especially his view and his plan, how he can foresee that, this kind of training program can be continued in the future. The third step I see is that, and as a modeler, we need to be very much aware of it, is that the CGE model's own limitations. So we should not really demand too much from the model, which is not really there, which you can't really answer the question through that particular model. So sometimes we may get frustrated, or even you will hear that CGE model is a black box where we don't know how things happen. That's a kind of very common allegation against CGE. But while we run the model, I have seen that it's not really a black box. But one thing, what really prompts many people to criticize CGE model is that it may not be able to answer many questions. But that's why I always think that for any particular model, it is very important to understand its terms of reference. What it can do, what it can't do, and be very specific. Be very clear, at the very beginning, that we are not here to solve everything. We are here to solve a particular problem, answer a particular question. I think if we can frame, our answers and our attempts into these kind of directions, I think we'll be able to, do very good results, very good analysis, very good research, which should be extremely useful for academic research as well as policy making.
Yeah, no, I think I would echo exactly what you're saying. I mean, one of my mentors, who's really helped me in my career learning modeling, Rob Davies from Zimbabwe, he always said, and I think very wisely, that we shouldn't really focus too much on the exact values and the estimates that come out of the models. We should use the models to structure our thinking, use them as a laboratory to experiment and to see what impacts are happening in the economy and help us sort of structure the breaking down of the problem. And I think we just need to keep that in mind when we use these models, because I think one of the challenges, the good news, is that, I'm going to sound like an old man, but the good news is that, when I started modeling 25 years ago, it was quite difficult to model. We didn't have Excel interfaces and other things. You really had to dig into the code, and it wasn't a very friendly GAMS environment and so on. Things have come a long way, and so we're making GAMS and models and so much easier to use, and building databases that are readily available. Back in my day, we used to have to build it from scratch. It's now there on the shelf. The problem with that is that as we make models easier and easier to use, we run the risk, and I know it's not happening in this room, but we run the risk of not spending as much time thinking through what's driving the change in the model. The model becomes just a calculator to get that number, and we stop using it as a tool to think through a problem and structure our thoughts. And so, and I think this is a bit of a challenge, and again, I'm not pointing fingers to anyone in this room, I know it's not valid, but I see it in many places where a lot of young students want to grab the model, push some buttons, get some numbers, and use it to get a dissertation. And what I always say is the model must come at the end. Start with a problem, think through the problem, and then test out what you expect to see in the model and see if that's the case. The model is almost on the side. It's not a substitute for structured thinking and so on. And so I think that's one of the challenges that we have today, is that actually our progress is a double-edged sword, that we are sort of making the models so easy to use, which is great. We're lowering the barriers to using the models. But what that really means is that it should be giving us more time to think through the problem, not just becoming a fast track to sort of avoiding thinking through the problem. So I think that comes back to what you were saying, which is not overestimating or over-emphasizing the importance of the model as much as it just being a tool to help us think through, structure our thoughts. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. I think most of the part you already mentioned, and I completely agree with you about the challenge. So one thing I would like to add in this is that the CG model itself is not a model like a spreadsheet model. You put some numbers and run the model. It's a combination of economic subject. So foundation of CG model is we call a micro foundation of macroeconomics. So you need a strong theoretical understanding of microeconomics as well as macroeconomics, and on top of that you need to have some understanding of the development economy. So, being an economic student, you need to have some strong holding of these three subjects before you jump into the model. Sometimes we think that when I interact with the people who never had experience of CGE modeling, it is their mindset that maybe it is like a spreadsheet. You teach us CGE modeling. It's not that one day or 1 week or 1 month job. You have to work continuously. You need to know how to interpret the result. That is one of the bigger challenge that every participant or every researcher must look at. It's not only solving the model; it's also interpreting the result, and that needs a lot of understanding about your subject. So when you are planning to start on the CGE modeling, please make sure that you have a strong interest and the knowledge base on micro, macro, and development economy, so that you can move forward on that. So this is number. Number two is obviously, as Professor Selim said, the data. Though we use sometimes in some countries we do not have a consumption survey data compatible with your baseline or the year of your concern. Maybe we have old data, but we have to work on and you have to survive on. So that kind of issues we already sometimes have. And also some national account data are not well balanced. In some countries, we may have one, say, the consumption estimate or income approach of GDP estimate. We do not have a consumption side or demand side estimate. So those kind of challenges are already there to get a balanced data set, and then accordingly we have the result challenges. So the last point I would like to mention is that we need capacity in both sides. In the one side of the researcher, those who are using the model, and also the people who are using the result of the model. So unless we have capacity in both sides, then the person who is interpreting the result at the other side may not be able to understand what the meaning of it. And it's not that only interpreting the result, the mechanism, how we develop the different scenario in the CGE model, how we are interpreting the result, and how that is going to impact the economy or helping the economy. That is needed. The capacity is needed, continuous working on it, and quality data. So there's three things we need to focus on to have this model more impactful in this.
Thank you. You have been conducting this CGE modeling exercises and trainings for around 2 decades. I think all three of you. So what has been your experience? I mean, he has just mentioned that there needs capacity building for 2 people, like who is analyzing the result and who is using the result. So what has been the challenges, or how has been your experience with the training programs over the years?
Please. Going to break order. Well, I think Barun said it very well, actually, and that was a really good point, that we need both, we need to raise awareness and expertise on both sides. We need to create good demanders for CGE modeling as much as good suppliers, like all of us. And so, a lot of the training that we do at IFPRI is with government officials, right? So with ministries of finance and planning and agriculture and more recently environment. And some of those partners in some countries have dedicated modeling units, right? So they are actually both demanding and supplying their expertise. And so we do a lot of focused training in these government ministries, but we don't train very often. And one of the big challenges is, and I don't know if it's because of our training, but people who we train tend to move up the ladder, and I'm sure it's just generally happening everywhere and always. And so the people we train, we come back a couple of years later in the government, and they've gone. They've moved up. They all end up in the central bank, okay, ultimately. So, and so I think what we need for long-term sustainability, we can still keep providing these focused trainings for our government partners, but I think what we really need are these regular, sustained partnerships with universities and research networks inside countries, in regions like SANEM, like Tribhuvan University. We need to have sustained training that are bringing in young people or new researchers, and you don't have to be young, you just have to be new to CGE modeling, so that we can keep supplying we can keep the supply up, so that we can keep focusing. And in the long run, the dividends from these kinds of trainings that we're doing now far outweigh a training that we might give in 1 year for a ministry, that 2 years from now won't have any of those people in the government. So I really think what we're doing here today, and again, it's all thanks to SANEM and to everyone here who's part of SANEM's network, for making it so easy. This is really where I think the long-term impact is, and I think we can see just the successes of SANEM over, was it 2 decades, 15 years, 2 decades. We're seeing that really bear fruit, and I think it is the long-term investment in training, annual regular training, that really makes the big difference. So this is why I'm so excited to be here for the 2nd year, and we're already planning for the 3rd and the 4th year. Right, over to you.
No, I fully agree with James. I think that's the thing I really want to, the point I really wanted to make. And among the government officials, what I have seen that they have huge interest and they really want to participate, and they do. But as James said, sometimes they go up in the ladder, but sometimes they even move from that particular relevant ministry or department to other, probably other department or other ministries. Sometimes we lose track of that. So what also I get the feedback from the policymakers is that the usefulness of a center like SANEM or any modeling center, which will continue hammering on this, the capacity building or sensitizing this policy modeling thing, and which will really help the new policymakers, like probably some of you will join, or some of you probably are active in contributing to the policy making process, will develop the capacity and contribute to the policy making continuously. So I agree with James that it's very important to continue this effort, and we will do that. We are very much committed. Last 2 decades, SANEM actually has been doing this kind of thing, and we are very committed. And the kind of partnership what we have in South Asia with universities, with other think tanks, research centers, with individuals also, I think, and through IFPRI, I think that is immensely valuable. And we will, as I say, that we are already getting the benefits out of it. Many of the old participants, they are in different policy making process or different international organizations, and they know that how to actually apply. Even if they don't really use it by themselves, they create the demand for this kind of use. So I see that in the kind of facilities. Barun?
No, this is absolutely perfect. Let me share my personal experience when a few years back, I was looking for shortlisting some candidate to hire an RA and work under me. I found a lot of people, they got training under SANEM. Okay, so my feeling is that SANEM as an institution, successful institution for the last 20 years, more than that, we have been giving training and all. And there are a lot of people, I think in South Asia, you ask the person who has done CGE model, he somehow directly or indirectly engaged with SANEM or maybe no Professor Selim. That is probably all right, but think the continuity. So that is where I think we need to focus on. And in that context, at last 2-3 years, the model that SANEM and IFPRI, we tried our best to implement in this region is the 2 different versions of the model. One is a foundation training that we organize in one of the countries in South Asia, and we invite participants from all the South Asian countries. We provide the basic training, and then we do a lot of following. So SANEM keep following up with them, whether they are able to use it. So they identify their own research questions, so they write their assignment, and I think partly we had a success on that. Some of our participants, they wrote nice research articles, they published policy brief, and some of the articles are also in the pipeline. So this actually, what I personally felt, and I think they will also agree with me, that the people are getting interest to be involved in it. And partly it's also useful that every tool that we have developed over time is becoming more useful, and the institutional support that we are getting from SANEM, their network of modeling with the people that are working in Southeast is really useful. I think we can continue this as a sustainable model and hope more success will come. And this type of model, if we can replicate in other parts of the world, that will be more useful. And the second point, what James, you and you also mentioned about the government officials, they shift from one department to other. There's a challenge, there's an opportunity as well. So as a modeler, we call it a spillover effect. Like once you train a group of officials with the planning department, and now next day they shift to agriculture department, but they shift with the knowledge. So maybe if they start applying that knowledge, it's like a spillover effect you have from planning to agriculture sector to change their mindset from one sector focus to multi-sector focus. Like as you said, the Rob Davis. So even I had opportunity to get training from Rob Davis, and what he said, the first objective of training is to change your mindset, thinking economy-wide perspective, not like only one sector or partial equilibrium or partial policy perspective. So I think so that needs continuous process of training. So one new set of staff will come, we have to train them, then obviously they will shift because of administrative requirement. But this process, we have to fill that pipe so that every time we have a new staff and they are equipped with this model, at least when some researcher makes some presentation using CGE model, they can understand how they solve that model and what kind of scenario they use and what the limitation of that model. I think those are the 2 points I would make.
Yeah. Can I just add a bit more to reinforce something that you just said, which is, when I think, I was talking earlier in our training about how I attended a course just like this, held by IFPRI back when I was just getting into CGE modeling a while ago. And what made the difference was not just because it was an IFPRI course, and of course IFPRI provides the best courses in the world. What really made the difference is that after I finished the course, I picked up a research issue. It was actually a cash transfer program in South Africa, my country, and I wrote a paper using the model straight away after the course. Picked up an issue that I was interested in, and I got support from Rob and from others who had been giving the training, and that reinforced everything that I learned. That I was able to take what I had learned in the course and write a paper and publish it, and that made all the difference for me. And so I think, as Barun was saying, one of the things that I think makes what we're trying to do in the last couple of years quite different is you attend the course and we commit to supporting you if you are committed to writing one of those papers. So if you're committed to trying to use the model to write a paper, we are committed to helping you do that, because that's what makes all the difference. And so that I think that kind of learning by doing with mentorship, I think that is the game changer. It was for me, and I think it will be as well for people. So if you're online and thinking of joining our course, come committed to writing a paper with the model. It's a lasting commitment, not just the time spent in the course, but also the time afterwards. And then I would also just add, when we work with governments, what shows when we are engaging with a government who says that they are serious about learning CGE modeling, they're not just wanting another course, but they actually want to use the skills that have been taught. What makes a difference is if they are committed enough to create positions within their departments for dedicated models, right? To create a modeling unit, or at least to create almost full-time modelers. That's what makes all the difference, and that's very similar again. And so with our government partners, when we see a government partner that is committed enough to create those positions and invest in the long term in their modeling capabilities, then we are absolutely committed to supporting those efforts. We're committed to any effort, but particularly committed to helping governments set up those long-term modeling units and those modeling expertise. Right, thanks.
Just to add 30 seconds.
Since we are recording this thing, board started, but it didn't finish it because we actually, we do 2 sets of training.
Yes.
One is for the for the foundation course in all the South Asian countries. Then we have this advanced course, and we'll continue doing these both courses and training programs in the future. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's beautifully summed up. So, what's our takeaway, our early career researchers' takeaway from that? Then is they have their commitment. They are committed towards teaching us, towards our capacity building. What we need to do is we need to work on it further. After the training, we should continue with other work and start practicing this. Otherwise, these kind of capacity buildings won't be as effective as they are. So,
selected this 2005 is the base year or the 2022 is the base year. And another question came up to my mind that you have used a lot of paper, you have wrote a while doing that, do you face any kind of challenges in working with the least development countries or not? And any surprising result have you got or not? Thank you.
Okay, it's a fantastic question actually, and it's quite a technical question. So for a CGE model, we need to have a base year picture, a picture of the core economic structure of the economy, how things look and how things relate to each other in the economy. And so we use our social accounting matrix to capture that initial economic structure. And we do typically tend to use a SAM, a social accounting matrix, for a particular year, right? But in reality, what we really want is, what is the best picture of the underlying structure of the economy that we're working on, right? And so we could just as easily say, well, let's take an average of SAMs for the last 5 years, and maybe that's the best picture of the stable structure of the economy. The truth is we don't often do that, and partly because when we're engaging with policymakers, we need to have a starting year, and we're going to project years into the future. But what we definitely then don't want to do is pick a year, a SAM for a year that is atypical. So for example, we have 35 countries where we maintain SAMs together with our national partners. And we update them every year. But along came COVID in 2020 and 2021, and we just stopped updating the SAMs because we knew that you would not want to base a model for a country on a SAM from 2020, because it was such an atypical year. Supply chains broke down, countries were in distress, not a good indication of the long-term structure of a country. So that's what we're looking for when we're picking a base year of the SAM. We're looking for a year that we think is reasonably representative, reasonably normal for as a starting point for then projecting forward into the future. And so we've started updating SAMs again from 2022 onwards because we got over that COVID hump. I don't know what the new normal is. We've got to take something. I don't know if this year is normal, but it's a lot more normal than we had under COVID, so that made a lot of sense. I don't know.
Just one.
About the surprise, I think I can add one of my personal experience. I actually worked on Bhutan, so there was an invitation came to both UN and ADB to develop the social equity matrix for Bhutan. And also there were a couple of other models too. So what I didn't actually have much idea about Bhutan. So when I actually went through the data, and that's really surprised me, that was a very shocking at the beginning for me, because I didn't have these kind of ratios for Bangladesh or any other countries in South Asia, or even not for Nepal, is that I found that Bhutan's investment GDP ratio is around 60%. Yes, so James also said, wow. So that's the kind of data you have in the national account. So I tried to check with Minister of Planning and Finance, and found that it's really the case. So you see the kind of challenge when, for example, in Bangladesh it is around 32%. For India, probably it's around the mid-20s, I think, 20. And for Nepal, probably it's around early 20s or something like that. So you see the kind of very significant structural difference, and which makes Bhutan very different from other countries. So we need to have a very good understanding of the data. That's what I realized while looking at Bhutan. So I became more and more careful then about the importance of understanding what James actually initially he mentioned, that not just simply jump on the model. You need to have a good understanding of the data, the structure. Whether do they make sense? Whether do you have any questions related to that? I think that will really make your analysis much better than simply just running the simulation.
Yes, sir. You can keep the microphone over there.
Thank you, panelists, for a wonderful presentation actually. So I have a few questions about the use of it, because they were said about sustainable use of it, CG. So as you say, there is for the best use of it. Not only best of use, it is important, but also how to analyze the data. So I think for this, we also need a planning, because as you said, CG is a economic wide impact, then there is a different aspect of the economy. So how you think different aspect and the different stakeholders get involved in the planning so that they can have a better analysis and better use of it. This is the question is one I want to ask. Then another one is, of course, here we want to use and we want to go for the best analysis as well as best use of it so that we can contribute to our economy, not only for the country, but maybe other as well. So, in your experience, what would be the ideal scenario or experience that other countries are useful for us adopting that? Thank you.
Maybe I can start because I realized there was a question we didn't quite answer, but I think it maybe is somewhat related, and that is that, and the question was, is it difficult to work in developing countries or low income developing countries? Is it difficult to do research with these kinds of models? And I would say, and actually I think Barun alluded to that, actually no, I think in many ways the CGE model offers a really good on-ramp to doing development research, right? In countries where we don't have amazing time series data or lots of household surveys to draw on, the modeling provides a platform for us to get started. And I think that then comes to your question about how do people get involved and the planning. And so for me, and I just think about how we use our models at IFPRI, it's a continuously improving investment or tool, an asset that we keep investing in. And the tool, the model, becomes a focal point. But there are parts of the model that we identify as perhaps not being as good as we would like. Or the data, as we use the model, questions come up and we wish we had better empirical analysis or a clearer understanding to sort of justify how we're using the model. A good example is labor markets, right? Not a lot, it's a core component of our general equilibrium models. How do labor markets function? Seasonal labor markets, rural-urban migration, movement between sectors, and what drives the decision to participate in the labor market or to stay outside of the labor market. There's a whole group of a whole area of labor economics and labor economic analysis that can be done in service of the model. That's also interesting in its own right. And I think as we start in a less developed country, maybe the focus is on the model itself. But then I know in my country, in South Africa, a lot of people are using the model, but what they're really doing is working on just improving parts of the model, right? Improving its treatment of competition, labor markets, macroeconomics, and so on. And so it can become a focal point where lots of people can get involved in using the model over a long period of time, for decades. And so I think that's, sorry, I'm stealing all the answers to all the questions, but maybe I'm getting the wrong answers. I think some of the best practices that I would look to are countries, maybe upper middle income countries that I've worked in, not so much, but where they have created a community around these models. And I think that's ultimately where we would like to get to, where the model becomes something we gravitate around, but to come back to our earlier theme, doesn't become the focus itself for any individual. What the focus for any individual is bringing in people with different expertise, household economists, labor economists, macroeconomists, all working together to improve the tool. And so it's kind of a gradual process. We might start small in a less developed country, and we become more ambitious over time and more demanding of the quality of the model as we get to more developed countries.
Yeah, I think I would like to answer your question about how we involve the people into this modeling exercise or modeling-based work. There are if we split two different categories, one category of people could be the contributing towards the model. So when we're developing model, need a lot of data processing, data cleaning, other things. So one group of people can be involved in it. Another would be the people who can contribute on the scenario that we want to develop or we want to solve using the model. So that is the process where we generally do a lot of stakeholder consultation. And the challenge of conducting the stakeholder consultation is that we never get a consensus. Then there I think CGE model scenario building has an advantage also. We can take a range of scenarios just to make an upper and lower extreme points to see what will happen to the economy if we follow this particular ideology of development, or maybe this particular school of thought and the other school, alternative school of thought. So that is how we engage the people. And there are some successful models that at IFPRI we have working with the government. As James mentioned, that there is some government, they set up modeling unit. So when we work with them, these government staff, they are committed to help our modeling team to develop, to identify the right scenario for their country. So we engage these people in that scenario building process, so that they feel like we are part of this analysis, part of this program, so that they can contribute on scenario building. And it also helps us to do something realistic, unlike something arbitrary scenario. So it is always better to be engaged with the academician or stakeholders those are engaged in the policy.
Any other questions from you?
Thank you. It's a very nice discussion. So I have two questions specifically. One side is the problem that our data is lacking. The other side is that our quality of data is lacking. I think Selim sir will know Bangladesh, in the Bangladesh household expenditure survey, income data is so very noisy. So if we use the income data to make Bangladesh SAM, so I think that creates problem along with our data lacking. So how we can overcome that if the quality of data, and we can understand how this is the lackness of the quality, that's why the result is not going well and as our expected. Second point is that I want to tell about the some policy perspective. For example, in the macroeconomics, you have a fiscal policy, monetary policy, and trade policy. There is lots of policy. I am not sure, is there any central banking policy, central bank policy, like two policy has taken by the central bank. One is the interest rate, and second is monetary policy. So I haven't seen in the CGE model whether it is in or not. I don't know. So that's why you can push these kinds of policy to some change. And second point is that in the policy perspective, in the morning when you give the example, if you want to tax on the upper quintile rich people, they are affected because they are able to tax. But if you don't increase the tax, but what we can do in Bangladesh case, we can increase the tax base. So because what the amount or what the people earning in Bangladesh, we are not taxing them because of lack of the institutional lackings, and then that's all. So how we capture actually, if you want to increase the tax base in the CGE modeling. And third point is that it's the policy perspective. We are giving the negative, some kind of negative shock on the exogenous factor in the CGE modeling. Then we want to compensate with the same kind of other shock, which we assume in the exogenous. But whenever we talk about the TFP, total factor productivity, so there is some kinds of exogenous model in the econometrics. So I actually know that if we increase the TFP, but what the actual policy that we can take from the analyzing the CGE modeling and push the corporate policy, specific policy that can affect on our actual economy.
Just start from the first part and then
Very, very good question. I think some of the, especially second and third, is a very limited. I'll leave those two, both James and Barun. The first one, I think the quality of data is always a problem. Countries like Bangladesh, it's not only Bangladesh, but even in the advanced countries that have these issues, probably our countries have more problems. But the choice is, what to do with this. So we can do several reality checks. You talked about income data from the household survey, but probably you'll find that the expenditure data is better than the income data, and we use the expenditure data quite extensively. And for the income data, when you do calculate different kinds of shares, probably we need to do several kinds of reality check, whether they make sense or not. So I think, using this kind of reality check and also, seeing, whether there have been some significant change from the past surveys, So I think you need to apply your own judgment also. I think this is something I'm quite sure that IFPRI, while you develop the SAM, you need this kind of procedure. You have this kind of procedure.
Yeah, no, we do. I mean, the way I like to think about it is, it's true, we really struggle with data, and having a systematic approach for sort of building the databases that we need helps us identify where those major data gaps are, where the data quality is not great, and we really would like to improve it. So again, just like the model helps us structure our thinking, the building of the SAM helps us assess and identify where those information data gaps are, which is quite useful. But the way I like to think about it, I mean, just because we don't have the data doesn't mean the policy decision doesn't have to be made. And the bottom line is, if we don't provide some information on what the trade-offs are and what the impacts of different policies could be, then decisions are going to be made without any information, right? They'll be made by politicians. Okay? We want to have some evidence to ground the policy decisions that we make. The nice thing about the SAMs is that we can identify where those gaps are weakest, and we can incorporate that into the analysis that we do, which I think is key. I'm not sure which of the questions you wanted to answer. There were two more left.
One is that fiscal and monetary policy section.
Yes, okay, I'll take that one, and I'll leave you on the, was that the tax-based question? Anyway, I'll leave you with the tax-based question, and I'll tackle the last one, which was, often we spend a lot of time thinking through a problem, and we ultimately end up shocking the productivity factor in the model, which might sound like a little bit of a disappointment, right? So we've done all this thinking and breaking down a problem, and we shock the same parameter again and again, regardless of what the problem is, right? And that really was a point that I wanted to make earlier, which is that most of the work happens before you get to the model. And the strength of the analysis, what gets you the good journal article, what gets you the rigorous analysis, is how much work you put into breaking down the problem and analyzing it before you end up shocking a particular parameter in the model. And so nowadays that is more true than ever before. I got a PhD just running CGE model simulations, right? Just changing some parameters. I don't think you can do that anymore. I think you actually need to blend different skills. So when we are working on climate change, right, we're working with biophysical models or crop models and river basin models to work out what the impacts would be before we even get to the CGE model. If we're looking at, like I mentioned, labor market issues and policies, we might be running some econometric analysis using the household survey and then using that information to feed into the model. When it comes to policy, we've got a lot of tools at IFPRI, but everyone's doing roughly the same thing, where we're doing an evaluation of a particular investment, and then working out what does that investment mean for productivity, what does it mean for the way in which jobs are created or whatever it may be, and then we're taking that information and imposing it on the model. So, so I think you're absolutely right. What matters not is which parameter are we shocking. What matters is all the analysis that we have to do to work out how much we should be shocking that parameter and telling the whole deeply grounded story about why we are making that change in the model, right? I think that's the ticket nowadays. I don't think there's any alternative nowadays except to do that kind of pre-analysis. Yeah, so central banks are actually increasingly interested in, so let's step one back. So what we have with our CG models is a real economy model, right? It's looking at jobs and production and things, goods and services. What central banks in our minds are typically interested in is monetary policy, interest rates, inflation, and so on. And that's not really what our CGE models that we've been using are good at. You can link the monetary sector to the CGE model, but often when that gets done, you end up simplifying the CGE model that we're using. You may aggregate it up so that you can then link together a monetary model and so on. But even the real economy model is of interest to central banks nowadays. If you think about one of the big concerns of central banks is how do you manage risk? Think about insurance, right? Prudential policy. So, and climate change, world market shocks, all of these are introducing risks. Just think of the last 5 years, the amount of variability and fluctuations in the global economy, the risks that countries are facing. This is something central banks are very much concerned about, right? And this is where our real economy models have much to offer. And so it's no surprise then that in many central banks you will find at least a small group of modelers who are doing real economy modeling, often using CGE models or a variant of CGE models to look at some of these big issues that concern them.
No, I think I would like to answer your question. So 3 things I would like to say. One is regarding quality of data. So I see it like something which are not in under control or which is beyond a modeler's control. That is the quality of data. So to overcome that kind of challenges, as a modeler, what we do is that we rely on the economic theory. Whether the data that we have entered into the model that is consistent with the theory. Okay, like you have learned during our training courses that high income households, they spend less of their income or expenditure on the food product. So as and when your income increases, you spend less money on the food product and more on the luxury commodity. So with those kind of theoretical consistency, you can derive from the data that you are using it. So that is one way to improve some amount of quality, because if it is a say government collected data, household survey data, or what, which we cannot go into the field again and check the quality. So to improve the quality, we need definitely a better way of collecting data. That is number one. Number two is that when you say about the TFP changes, when we use it, whether 1%, 2%, what is the basis or how we can relate that. I think there is these are the areas where econometrics and CGE model, we can have a cross-pollination each other under the ideal situation. But in generally, we may not have that strong relationship between the investment and TFP and using econometric data, because econometric model requires a lot of observation. So in that case, what we do is that we just try to tell the policymaker, look, if you target some amount of productivity growth or income growth, then you can gain additional this much of your economy. So this is it depends on how we are interpreting. The third point I want to emphasize is that we are researchers. We should run the model. It's not like the model will drive us. So to answer your question, the tax base and other thing. So that's what, before you run the model, we do a lot of background calculation on the scenario building. Some of your training exercises you have seen. So you have to see that when you are changing tax base, how much tax burden you are ultimately putting on the household. Because in the SAM, the social and matrix data we use, it's not that what we use is the direct tax collected from different households. So if you calculate the rate, it's an average direct tax rate. So if you change the tax base or tax rate, ultimately burden goes to the particular group of household. How much additional burden you will get. So you need a lot of calculation. That is what we say. The model should be run by the researcher. We should not be driven by the model. We shouldn't expect that, okay, if we just change the base and model will give the result. So it's not like that. That's how our knowledge of subject and capacity training is necessary.
Just to add one thing, it's a question to James, in fact, to answer the tax rate, whether that makes sense, my answer. Is that, what we have done so far is a kind of representative household model. Because we have averaged those households into method-specific groups. So one idea was to run this macro simulation, and whether we have the detailed household data linking with this to this model, whether that really helps in understanding this tax-based issue better.
Yes, no, absolutely. So I think one of the earliest uses of CGE models, way back, right, even before my time, was to use was looking at tax incidence analysis. Who are the winners from different tax reform scenarios and so on. And as Selim said, our models can tell us about what's happening to high income versus low income households, rural versus urban households. But we've taken the population and we've clustered them together into these groups. We've aggregated them together. But what you can do is go one step back. So when we build a SAM, when we build a model, we're using a national household survey with thousands of households in them. And a lot more variables, information being included in the survey than we actually bring into the model. And that's a great symbiotic relationship between the microsimulation, the household survey model, and the CG model for tax incidence analysis. Because what you can start to do is you can say, well, I'm going to have a tax policy based on how much a household is earning, but I'm going to give them an exemption. So if they have children under the age of 12, I'm going to give them an exemption. Right? We don't have children in our model, right? Or at least we can't see them. They're in there, but we don't separate them out. But you can see them in the household survey. So you can do much more granular tax policy analysis. You can see pensioners and provide support. And not just for tax policy, but for social protection policy as well. There's a lot you can do inside the household survey, designing your simulations your tax policy, social protection policy simulations, and then you can take that information and feed it up to the same households. They're more aggregate in the CGE model, but they are linked back down to each of those households in the household survey, and that's a really powerful linkage that we can exploit in designing a simulation, not just in looking at the impacts of a simulation on households. So you're absolutely right, that is a key asset.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, I'm seeing household data.
There's a microphone. Are you holding the microphone to ask the question?
Yeah, I will ask.
Okay.
So on the same household data, I was working on the poverty and inequality reduction process, and for a country like ours, like low income countries, the income reduction, the income inequality gap is higher, right? So even a small change in policy could bring a lot of higher impact. And is it possible to integrate household survey data more in depth in the CGE modeling? And also the other question is, do these sort of surveys happen once in 10 years? So how do we account that? And the second part is about the informal economy. Because of informal economy, does the model always get balanced? I mean, some way through consumption or any other expenditure way, it could be seen in the CGE modeling or in our national income accounts as well. But does it all get recorded, or does it always get into equilibrium?
Okay. Well, those are great questions. And so, we already are using the household survey to build the different household groups within the model. And we can just have more and more households in the model. We can keep bringing we can have not just 10 household groups, but 100 household groups in the model. Certainly can do it. In fact, there was a brief period in CGE modeling history not so long ago where people were trying to put every single household from the household survey into the model. The truth is that's probably overkill, because we're making assumptions, as Barun said, about how different households behave, and we're often got quite simple assumptions about behavior. And so when households have quite similar income and expenditure patterns, they're going to behave very similarly inside the model. So why not just group them together? So the key thing for the household survey is trying to figure out, or for deciding what groups to have in the model and what groups to just leave inside the household survey in the micro simulation, is do we think the households behave differently? Right, so we know, or do they have very different income and expenditure patterns? And so that would be something that would be the key decision. Otherwise, you're free to put as many households into the model as you want, so long as the household survey can support it. But more doesn't always mean better. I think that's the key thing. And then your second question was on informality, and that's a great question. We get it every single time, all the time, right? People just assume our CGE models only focus on the formal sector, all the time. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Okay. We are using national accounts, right? At the end of the day, that is our main source of data. And the National Accounts Department in a statistical agency, I would call the apex group within a statistical agency, because their role is to bring all the data together from the survey group, from the household survey group, the industrial economic survey group, the trade data. All of it has to be brought together into the estimation of GDP. And we know that the informal sector is captured in GDP, right? Or at least a big chunk of it. So we're very good at capturing the informal, at least in principle, we're very good at capturing the informal sector that produces goods and services, or goods. We're not very good at capturing the informal sector that produces services. And that also means the production of those services inside our own households. We have a very big blind spot when it comes to what we do within our own households, right? In terms of services, cooking, childcare, etc. So that part of the informal sector is very much outside of our field of view. But subsistence farming, self-employed informal enterprises that are producing goods and selling those goods, we're capturing all of that, just like national accounts is, and therefore it is captured inside our model. Now you can argue that national accounts doesn't do a good job at capturing the informal sector, but we know that they are trying, right? So they are trying to design better surveys and get better estimates every single year, better farm surveys to pick up how all the different things subsistence farmers do, better surveys, labor force surveys, so you capture not just someone's primary job, but their secondary and tertiary jobs that they're also doing to try and make ends meet. And so, as the data gets better, we will get better estimates of the informal sector, but we are definitely trying to keep it inside our model. It is not being ignored. But yeah, we always hear, the assumption is we're only looking at the formal sector, and it's just not true. Yeah.
Meet and you also lost your microphone. Position. You can get your position back.
Yeah, I have one more question, like related to data, but it is more or less like, according to your experience, if you can, like, how many sectors are really optimal for a SAM? I know it is related to data. Why I'm asking this question because many times a policymaker asks something really minute, like what is the impact of AI, or we are investing so much in we are planning to invest in IT industry. Like, what is the overall impact on the economy? And the second question is quite a short question. How are you seeing the interaction between the AI and Computable General Equilibrium model? If you can give your thoughts, yeah.
Okay, so it's a great question. I don't know, there is no magic answer. How many sectors is too many sectors? I think there is, I just remember one of our colleagues, Sherman Robinson, always used to say, it really comes down to finding the right balance between the number of activities you have in the SAM, so how many industries, how much detail we have on the industries, how much detail we have on the factor markets, labor, land, capital, and how many households we have. And he always used to say, you really, in an ideal world, you want to have a lot, you want to have them in proportion to each other. What you don't want is what he used to call that hourglass, where you have lots of different sectors and lots of different households, but you've got very few factors, labor types in the model, and so on. And the reason why is because, remember, what we're interested in looking at, the key feature, asset, the advantage of using these models is to look at income distribution. How does the changing pattern of production across all those different sectors affect household incomes for different household groups? And if you're funneling everything through just one or two different factors, you're throwing away all that valuable information that you've got on how different sectors produce their goods. More labor intensive, less labor intensive, more skill, less skill intensive. You're throwing all that away. So there is no magic answer. It's not 100. It really is that relationship between how many sectors, how many factors, and how many households. I think that is key. But you're never going to get away from the fact that someone wants to see their pet sector of interest inside the model. And often we'll just do it to keep someone happy. But we know that really what matters is in the bigger picture, sort of how well we can capture the distributional effects of those shocks. And then finally on AI, I think it has the potential to dramatically change CGE modeling. And we're investing very heavily in AI at IFPRI. There is no substitute for coming on a course. Right? We will have tools, we have tools already now, that you could probably even voice your question, and the model will run and tell you what the answer is. And so you may be wondering, if that's what we've already got sitting in our pocket, right, back at IFPRI, why do we need to come on a course like this? And again, to re-emphasize, the model itself is actually not that important. What matters is the thinking. What matters is that structuring your thoughts. What matters is understanding how different parts of the economy link together and the trade-offs that causes, right? AI is not going to, it may help us think through those problems, but there's no substitute for us thinking that through ourselves. And so yes, we will make it even easier to use the model. And again, that danger of us then stopping thinking, because the model does all the thinking for us. That's not, the model's never going to do the thinking for us. We need to do it. So when we're developing AI tools, it's not really with our course participants and partners in mind. It's really for people who don't have any modeling background, any experience, but but want answers to questions. And so, that's the target market. It's not us in this room, it's the others out there who haven't been on a course.
Yeah, just to answer your question on the sectors, I think I agree with you that there is no clear answer that how many sectors. But definitely we can think of what are the sectors. So when we are working on a model, we have to be careful about what are the sectors we are considering. And it depends on where we are working. If I give an example for India, when we are working at national level, maybe some sectors are highly important. But when we go to a state, maybe a particular sector is important for the state, may not have such a big impact on the national level. Because in that case, you need to switch between the sectors when you are working at the national level or the sub-national level. So that's the kind of a key that we have to keep in mind. What are the sectors we are working on? It's like for Nepal, it's a hydro sector, it has a big kind of impact, whereas hydro may not be that important for other countries. So that is how we have to take a choice. A number of sectors, sometimes some sectors is a very tiny share of your economy. It doesn't matter on your model at this point. Okay, so that's the way we think of it.
And then, so last question. Yeah, and then of course,
It's the final question.
If you don't ask question this year, then there is a chance of being invited next year.
First of all, thank you to the organizers for arranging such an interactive session with our distinguished panelists. So what I want to ask is, since we are talking about data, so how do we convert the raw statistical data into the model-ready values, which we have already seen in the US tariff example, where how we have converted into model-ready values? First of all, my first question is that. And the second question is, suppose I got an answer that I saw that household in the rich household is getting more are more benefited than the lower middle income and middle income household. So if I want to again manipulate my answer, will it be ethical or not? What will be the ethical consideration in that case?
No, just first very about the data, it's definitely challenging. There are many researchers globally, even at IFPRI, they just work on data. They don't work on the model. So it's a really big issue, and especially having data from different sources, national accounts, trade data, household data, labor force survey data. You need to collect tax data. And then you need to put all these together into a very consistent framework, and then do the kind of balancing. And your programming can balance it in a very mechanical way, but you have to then check whether this makes sense. So I think it's always been an issue, and then always been challenging. But with the development of new tools, what IFPRI has developed too, things have become really easier now, where researchers like us also need to get involved in this data compilation process, because otherwise what James and Barun, both of them were highlighting that the whole thinking process would not be perfect, I would say. And the other question, I think
yeah. So can you repeat the question, because I missed the second one?
No, about the richer household and poorer households. If richer households get more benefit.
Ethical dilemma.
Yes.
But that depends on the particular type of simulation and the closures.
Yeah, I think actually, so I could not understand properly your question.
Do you want me to? Okay, let me paraphrase what I think your question was, which is, we're researchers, we're supposed to be objective. We're analyzing a problem, we're analyzing a policy. And I think your question is, what if we see there is a policy that would disadvantage us individually, right? Would we then try and bury the results? And I think it's a really good question. I'm not sure if I would necessarily worry about it, because a model is just a model. I've never thought about that. I think there is. Let me put it this way. We talked about central banks. I think earlier this week we were having a discussion with a colleague from the central bank here in Nepal about modeling, behind closed doors. versus modeling that's out in the open. And of course, as researchers, we think that all the modeling should be out in the open. That's how we get transparency, peer review, etc. But sometimes our policy-making colleagues, like in central banks, are making really important decisions that you can make quite a lot of money off, like what's going to happen to the interest rate, right? And for them, making those policies behind closed doors is really important. And so, I'm not quite sure if I'm answering your question, but I do think there can be ethical issues as an analyst around sort of if you are behind the closed door and seeing what the modeling and the analysis is saying, does that give you an unfair advantage, and do you actually exploit that knowledge to try and to make a profit, to make an income? So I like to think all of us modelers are 100% ethical, right? But I'm sure there's some cases out there where people are manipulating, and really modeling is just one tool. I'm sure there are much more sophisticated tools where people are making more money off. I just don't know any. Sorry, if I did, I would be a millionaire.
So we have our last question.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session and training. I think you are leaving today or tomorrow morning, I don't know. But I'm being more interested on SAM now. And when you are here, I'm just not asking a question, but I'm asking for some more trainings actually. Why not when Dr. Thurlow is here, right? So when we are talking about SAM-based CGE model calibration, and SAM is actually highly dependent on data for 1 year. Maybe for our country, we cannot just calculate SAM for many years and then take an average, as Dr. Barun said earlier. So if there is a year with exception, there may be data errors as well. Maybe was that the reason why you stopped calculating that SAMs for the countries, as you said earlier, after the COVID. So the next thing is, I do think we need to learn that SAM in depth, and I want to ask if we can expect for some sorts of capacity building training on SAM in the near future, because I guess we should go along with the training of SAM as well, so that we can see overall the economy in the broader sense, and we can get how the things are getting changed and how the policy is being impacted. And why not maybe one day, as Dr. Barun did for India, someday we will end up creating SAM for 7 provinces, as we have 7 provinces in Nepal. That was what I was asking for.
I want to add. You are the last.
Yeah. So.
So adding to his question, there are many CGE models, including IFPRI CGE models, and many CGE models are using different SAM or different base. So sometimes the result could vary, and again we are predicting in a very volatile world. So sometimes we we are using dynamic model and we predict something, and then something changes, economic changes. So it raises questions regarding credibility also. Okay? So how do we tackle this one?
Yeah, but if I could, so if I think back back to the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000s, right? When I was still in high school, just to be clear, there was what I would think of as the model revolution in CGE modeling. It's when IFPRI produced its standard CGE model that was designed to work with pretty much any country's database, and we just made it public, right? And it massively improved the transparency and the credibility of CGE modeling. Today there are standard models coming out of lots of organizations, right? Generic models that other people can use, also publicly available. To some extent, we don't really care about the model anymore. I mean, that's not entirely true. We like our model, but we recognize that they're all basically the same at the end of the day. What happened in the 2010s, I like to think of as a data revolution. It's when we stopped investing in standard models per se, and started investing in standard SAM building tools. And the key thing here was to say, well, if your SAM is different from my SAM for the same country, for the same year, can we trace back each of the values in my SAM to the original data that is underpinning that particular entry, that particular statistic in the SAM. And so we created a SAM building toolkit where you feed in the very original data from a household survey, from national accounts, from the balance of payments, and then it goes through a process of being knitted together, and at some point we have to balance it, right? We have to reconcile all this information from different sources. And this SAM building toolkit allows us to go from first principle data, raw data, all the way to the final SAM that goes into the model. And that allows us to A, justify the values that are in our SAM. It also allows us, when you come along and say, well, actually the data in my SAM is better because I use this data here, we can say, well, let us use the same data and we'll put it in our toolkit and it'll improve the quality of the data. And so that data revolution has been phenomenal, right? It's what we call our Nexus SAMs, and I think others are starting to do the same as well. And so what that means then, the toolkit doesn't just improve the quality of the data, but it also is a very standardized approach. Every year we bring in the next year's worth of data and we estimate the SAM again the next year. So we generally don't have a break of 3 or 4 years between SAMs. We're generally updating the SAM every single year. And it's important because a policymaker will always, if they don't like your model, they'll criticize the data, or if they don't like your conclusion, they'll criticize your data, right? And so you want your data to be as up-to-date as possible so that you can avoid that critique. And so the SAM, right now, that data revolution, that SAM building revolution that we went through over the last 10 years or so, that is now the critical part of becoming a good modeler, right? Because the model itself is generic, everybody can get the model. What matters is the data quality. So I couldn't agree with you more. The most important step is to learn how the SAM is built. And so we will commit to helping you learn the SAM toolkit. We've already shared it in its entirety, but we'll also sort of commit to making sure, and that's true for everyone that's in the room, we'll commit to making sure that you know how to use the SAM building toolkit so that you can become part of that data revolution and be confident that the data you're using in your model is at least the best data that you're aware of. And yeah, I don't know what the next revolution is. Maybe it's AI, and all of us are out of a job. But right now, the data quality issue and the SAM building issue is everything, right? And so yeah, absolutely committed to making sure you've got full control, full awareness, full control, full expertise on how to use that tool.
Just to add your question on provincial SAM, I think at this point we have a national SAM toolkit. We are working at the sub-national level of SAM. So once we are fine-tuned and we are done with the tools, then we definitely have another round of training on the provincial SAM. That again, I echo what James said. There's a quality of data at the provincial level. Some countries may not have good quality data at the provincial level, and it's very difficult to have SAM at the provincial level unless until we have good quality national accounts data. So that is important.
Okay, so I think this was a very complete ending to the training program. We learned about the technical aspects, we got to know about the questions we had regarding the practical aspect of CGE modeling in our lives. And thank you so much for the intriguing questions, and thanks to our panelists for their such wonderful answers, and we got to learn a lot about CGE modeling from you. Thank you so much. See you in some other forum. Good night.
Thank you.